Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and we're here today because it's a big week for books. The National Book Award announced its finalists for the 2025 prizes. Yesterday I did a video looking at the finalists for the fiction category, and today I am going to be looking at the finalists for the translated literature category. And then, as I am filming this, tomorrow, Thursday, October 9th, we should be getting a Nobel Prize laureate for the literature category, so I will be doing a reaction to that as well. There's just a lot going on in the book world. It's pretty exciting. Now, I am not an expert in translated literature. The reason I am paying more attention to the translated literature category this year is that I want to get a little bit better about global literature. And paying attention to the long lists and the short lists is a good way of doing that. You know, I do think it is important to read outside your comfort zone every once in a while. And I have a very European, North American center in my own reading. So it's important for me to remember other literature exists and to try to get outside of that. So we're going to look at the 5 finalists. Before we get into it, I will say the only book that I had read off of the long list did not make it. That is Hunchback by Sao Ichikawa and translated by Polly Barton. And I'm not entirely surprised that it didn't. That is a very divisive book. It's sort of deliberately prickly. So not everyone will ultimately respond to that book. I am glad that it made it onto the long list because that is ultimately what made me pick up the book. I happened to be in the library a day or two after the announcement of the long list, and I saw Hunchback, and because it had been on the long list for the International Booker and now was on the long list for the National Book Award, I picked it up. It's a very short book too, so very easy to get through quickly, but your reaction to it will really depend on how you respond to the content of the book. So ultimately, I'm not surprised it wasn't on the shortlist, but I am glad that it had been on the long list. And since we're talking about surprises, about the things we say goodbye to from the long list, let's just keep going in that vein for a moment, because I am very surprised that We Do Not Part by Han Kang and translated by Yi Ye-wan and Paige Ania did not make it onto the list of finalists either. First of all, let's state the obvious. Han Kang won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year, and she happened to have a book scheduled to be released in English in January or February of this year. And the second reason that's really surprising is that We Do Not Part has been one of the most consistently regarded books for this year. And it feels surprising then that it would have made the long list, but not the short list. And this is where I guess you could make an argument that perhaps the jury wanted to spread the wealth a little bit. A lot of people have been reading Han Kang already, so perhaps they wanted to shine a light on some authors people are less likely to be familiar with. I don't know. Maybe they genuinely liked these 5 books better than We Do Not Part. I don't know. But it is surprising that Han Kang did not make it into the mix of finalists. And then Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico and translated by Sophie Hughes. I think that one was also on the long list for the International Booker and didn't make it onto the short list. If I'm remembering this correctly, I think that's how it went. And I remember there being mixed reactions to that book, so not entirely surprised it did not ultimately make it. Let's talk about the books that actually made it as finalists. You may notice I just switched sides, and that is because with the light coming in through the window and from the light, I'm having trouble reading the tiny print in my notepad, which doesn't usually bother me, but maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. So I switched sides. So the finalists are On the Calculation of Volume 3 by Solveig Bale and translated by Sophia Hersey Smith and Jennifer Russell. We Computers, a Ghazal novel by Hamid Ismailov, translated by Shelley Fairweather Vega. We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, translated by Robin Myers. Sad Tiger by Nej Sino, translated by Natasha Lehrer. The Remembered Soldier by Anyat Dani, translated by David McKay. So that's the list of finalists. It does seem like a good group. But let's talk about each of them in turn to give you a bit more of a sense of them and give myself a bit more of a sense of them to see if these are things that I might want to read. So I'm not trying to review these books. I am very specifically talking about my own reaction to them and whether or not I would be interested in reading them. And I'm not really going to do predictions about what might ultimately prevail, as I did with the fiction category, because this is an area that I am working to get better at. So, and since I haven't read the competitors, I have a much harder time parsing through what might emerge victorious. And I think doing that anyway sort of depends on a knowledge of the competitors each year and what type of book usually stands out. And I just don't really have that with translated literature compared to fiction. So if you have thoughts about what might win, I would love to hear that in the comment section down below. So let's start with On the Calculation of Volume, Book 3 by Solveig Bale and translated by bookshop.org just says Russell. It's Jennifer Russell. Now, interestingly, because I wasn't really following the translated literature category that closely last year, I didn't see that one of the previous books in this series was on the list for translated literature last year. I noticed it when it was on the list for the International Booker Prize. And I have those first two books in the series, On the Calculation of Volume 1 and On the Calculation of Volume 2. I have not read them yet, so I would very much like to. But the barrier for entry here is that I would want to read these two before diving into Book 3. And then really also in reading Book 1 and Book 2, I would sort of be deciding if I want to continue in this series. It's ultimately going to be about 7 books, if I remember correctly. So, although they are tiny, that sounds like a bit of a big commitment, so I would want to try these before committing to Volume 3, which, by the way, has not been published yet. It will be released on November 18th, which is, I think, the day before we get the winners of the National Book Award. And that is a frustration that I think has been growing this year from people who have commented on the fact that it's really frustrating when a long list for a prize is announced, and then even when a shortlist is announced, and books are not available to be read. And I actually agree with that. I think it is frustrating because I like to look at a long list as a tool for discovery. It helps me discover books I might not have known about or rethink and center in on books that I might want to read, perhaps that I wouldn't have read under other circumstances. That certainly happened to me with Hunchback, for example. And you don't get that when one or even several of the books are not available. For instance, I didn't really intend to read Hunchback after the long list came out, but it made the long list and then I saw it in the library. That confluence of events is what made me read it. And with On a Calculation of Volume Book 3, you can't have that experience because, again, it comes out the day before the winner is announced. If it wins this category, then maybe you'd have that experience. But right now, it's just a little bit difficult. But I guess what we can say is in the meantime, there are the first 2 books, and if you haven't read them, you can go back and maybe see if you'd be interested in Book 3. But it's just an annoying thing. Anyway, I am not going to read the entire description of every book. If you want more information about one of the titles, I will have links to all of the books from the translated literature long list in the description box down below. Not just the shortlist, but the long list as well. So you can go to bookshop.org. You can purchase a book if this has sparked any interest in you, or you can just get more information about the books there. Or you can support your local independent bookstore, or you can support your local library. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a section from the end of the description, because usually by then they start summarizing what the book is about. And I'm going to try to use that to keep this video moving along and relatively short. So here's what they say for On the Calculation of Volume Book 3. I can speak. blending poetry and philosophical inquiry with rich reflections on our discombobulating times. Bowles, on the calculation of volume, asks us to consider what is a single person's responsibility to humanity and to the preservation of this world. It does sound very interesting. This is another case where I was very resistant to the idea of reading on the calculation of volume when the International Booker Longlist came out because of the description's inclusion of terms like philosophical. I tend not to enjoy things that are overly or heavily philosophical. But the feedback that I got from people who did start reading their way through the long list for the International Booker was that it was a really incredible book. And that sort of turned around my thinking. That's another reason I like doing these videos, because I might dismiss one of these books. Dismiss is a harsh way of saying it, maybe. Or I might just say, yeah, I don't know if that one's going to be for me. And through comments, I might change my mind. And again, it's important to read outside your comfort zone every once in a while. So feedback from other people helps decide which ones to get outside of your comfort zone for. Let's talk about We Computers, a Ghazal novel by Hamid Ismailov and translated by Shelley Fairweather Vega. Here is the end of the description for it. Hamid Ismailov brings together his work as a poet, translator, and student of literature of both East and West to craft a postmodern ode to poetry across centuries and continents. Crossing the poets maudits, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, poets maudits with beloved Sufi classics, blending absurdist dreams with the life of the famed Persian poet Hafez, moving from careful mathematical calculations to lyrical narratives, Ismailov invents an ingenious transnational poetics of love and longing for the digital age. Situated at the crossroads of a multilingual world and mediated by the unreliable sensibilities of digital intelligence, this book is a dazzling celebration of how poetry resonates across time and space. And it does sound interesting, but this is definitely a case where, although I love the cover, I feel like my difficulties with poetry, because I tend to struggle to get into poetry, the difficulties with philosophy, the fact that I'm terrible at math, so when they say moving from careful mathematical calculations to lyrical narratives, it feels like this is not a book for me. But part of me is curious, I admit, and if you have read this and you enjoyed it, let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. If you read this and didn't like it, let me know what you thought as well, actually. But it sounds interesting, but I feel pretty comfortable taking a pass for myself on We Computers. Your mileage may vary, and that's fine. So let's just move on to the next book, which is We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara and translated by Robin Myers. I actually saw this one in a bookstore this past weekend, and I meant to pick it up because I was in one row of shelves and I saw it in the next one, and I thought, ooh, when I get over there, I want to look at that. And then I got distracted and I ended up not walking into that row. So I saw it and then forgot about it until now. And now I want to go back to that store and look at it again. This one, I feel like I could easily be convinced to read. And to hammer that in, here's the last paragraph of the description of this book on bookshop.org. Based on the life of Antonio de Arauso, a real figure of the Spanish conquest, We Are Green and Trembling is a queer Baroque satire and a historical novel that blends elements of the picaresque with surreal storytelling. Its rich and wildly imaginative language forms a searing criticism of conquest and colonialism, religious tyranny, and the treatment of women and indigenous people. It is a masterful subversion of Latin American history with a trans character at its center, finding in the rainforest a magical, surreal space where transformation is not only possible, but necessary. Surrealism is hit or miss for me, but everything else in that description sounds like something that is very attuned to what I like to read and get to know. I don't know a whole lot about the Spanish conquest, but I would be open to learning more. The fact that it's a queer Baroque satire absolutely made my ears perk up. And I also am very drawn in by the searing criticism of conquest and colonialism, religious tyranny, and the treatment of women and indigenous people. Those are stories that I absolutely respond to, and the fact that there is a trans character at the center really sounds interesting. So what I'm actually going to do is see if my library has a copy of this book and check around to see if maybe there's an audio available. I think that's the way I'm going to go. And if I can't find it through those means, maybe I'll think about actually purchasing a copy for myself, because I also think it is important, you have to watch out for your own budget, but it is also important to sort of reward publishers for putting stories that appeal to you out in the world. Basically, you let them know these are things that are worth publishing and pursuing, because it will give you like financial, you will be compensated for it, essentially. So if you want to see more of them, maybe good to think about that. So this one sounds interesting to me. I said I'm not going to do predictions. I feel a little odd about On the Calculation of Volume Book 3, since it's the third book in what I believe is a 7-book series. I don't know that We Computers might, and this is where it's difficult to say, because perhaps my disinterest in We Computers is making me undercount it or underestimate it, but I feel like there are other contenders here. We Are Green and Trembling feels like a very big contender to me. If I had to pick one book from this list and say I feel like this one is the big contender, I would go with Sad Tiger by Neige Sino and translated by Natasha Lehrer. This is also a divisive book. Sort of, you can call it a cilantro book. People either love it or they hate it. But I have gotten a lot of feedback about this book that is very interesting from my Longlist reaction. People have commented to say that they love it and think it's very important and more people need to read it. I've had people comment to say it's an incredibly difficult and upsetting book, but they are so glad that they read it and think more people should experience it. And I have also heard from people who have said this book is miserable and not worth anybody's time. So I think how you respond to this book depends on how you respond to the heavy aspects of the story. But most people, even if they don't respond well to that aspect of the book, seem to appreciate what the book is doing and what the book is saying. So it puts me in a bit of an odd space because, I'm managing my own anxiety. I don't know that I would be up for something that is described as that heavy, but it sounds interesting. But again, if you told me I had to pick what might win now and predict something, I would probably say Sad Tiger. Here's the last paragraph of the description. Sad Tiger, the title inspired by William Blake's poem The Tiger, is a literary exploration into how to speak about the unspeakable. In this extraordinary book, there is an abiding concern, how to protect others from what the author herself endured. In the midst of so much darkness, an answer reads crystal clear by speaking up and asking questions. A striking, shocking, and necessary masterpiece. It has won a lot of literary prizes already. So I believe I saw something that said that it was a sensation in France. And, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see if my library has a copy of Sad Tiger and also if there's an audio available anywhere, and think about actually reading it for myself, because I do think that's important. And the fact that people love it despite the heaviness, it does intrigue me. And it is 224 pages, so it's not overly long. So I don't know. I'm going to think about this and see if it's something that I want to read. Let's talk about the final book, which is The Remembered Soldier by Agnès Danier and translated by David McKay. This one, a beautiful cover again. And here is, it's difficult because they only have one paragraph here, so I am going to end up in a situation where, kind of similar to On the Calculation of Volume, I'm taking a single sentence from the end. So, let's see. In The Remembered Soldier, Agnès Danier immerses us in the psyche of a war-traumatized man who has lost his identity. The reader is caught up in a riveting spiral of confusion that only the greatest of literature can achieve. So, I haven't heard much about this one. I remember it does sound interesting, but I feel like I would want to hear a little bit more about it because it is also a longer book. It's 576 pages. So it's tempting, but I think I would decide what to do with We Are Green and Trembling and Sad Tiger before. This is probably like running in third in terms of my own interest in reading my way through this. I don't intend to read all of them. So it sounds interesting. And again, I don't know where to fit it into a prediction. So I'm not really going to. But, all in all, this looks like a fascinating shortlist of books. It was a fascinating long list as well. So if you have thoughts about the long list, books from the long list that you might have wanted to see on the short list, or anything about that, what you might want to win, let me know in the comment section down below. And again, big week for books. I've already done the fiction shortlist. That will be linked down below. Tomorrow I will be doing a reaction to the Nobel Prize for Literature announcement. And now this. So catch up on what's already happened and stay tuned for more. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.